Good morning. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Today's reading focuses on the wise men come to visit Jesus after his birth. I'm sure we're all at least somewhat familiar with the story. So, here's a few questions for you to see how well you were listening. How many wise men are mentioned in today's reading? Anybody? Look again. It actually doesn't say. Here's one. What gifts does Matthew say that they brought, and what did they bring them in? Anybody? Gold? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. That's right. And what did they bring them in?
Treasure chests.
Treasure chest. That's right. I thought that was an interesting thing I'd never noticed before in reading it. All right, so where did they come from? What country? Does it say? The East. That's right. And to where did the wise men follow the star to begin with? To Herod in Jerusalem. That's right. And lastly, why don't they return to Jerusalem on their way home? They had a dream. They had a message from God telling them not to do so. Thanks for indulging me in that. I thought it was fun. So that's what's in the text, right? But what's the significance of the story as a whole? I mean, I'm sure most of us have heard it so many times. We may not really give it too much thought. It's a nice thing, you know, the shepherds and the angels all on Christmas Day, and then the wise men a few days later. But think about it. Who are these men? And where are they actually coming from? Well, judging on their observation of the heavenly bodies, the star they say they saw on its rising, it seems that they're practitioners of some kind of astrology. From the east, that's a pretty vague description, I think, of where the men came from, isn't it? Yeah. Perhaps, though, the reader at the time, maybe they would have known what Matthew was talking about. Or maybe it's not that important specifically where they came from. Although, I will say, from the east is typically not a good sign. When Jonah is sitting under a bush, God sends the sun to kill the bush, and then a hot wind disturbs him from his rest. Also, Israel, the kingdom of Israel, was invaded several times, many of them from the east. Interestingly enough, astrologers from those eastern places have not had a great history with Israel themselves. I'm thinking specifically Babylonian and Assyrian wise men who were advisors to the kings who held Israelites captive to their respective empires. Isaiah 47 even goes so far to say that their astrologers will burn up in the coming times, incapable of seeing what is coming. So most likely these men would come from the same or a similar tradition of stargazing people. I've heard various ideas surrounding their background. Most prominently, that they were Zoroastrian, which is a monotheistic religion originating in ancient Persia, which is another empire which controlled Israel for a time. Again, none of this is known for sure, but it can give you an idea about who these men might have been, where they're coming from. So just to review the things we do know, these men are almost definitely not Jewish. They practice some form of divination, looking at the stars to see what's happening. And divination and several Eastern places are both fairly well frowned upon in Jewish history. Yet, who comes to see Jesus? Who is it that notices that something has changed in the world? Is it the so-called Jewish government headed by Herod? Those in authority empowered by Rome? Is it the religious authorities? No. It's foreigners who are apparently not supposed to be able to see what is coming. So what does that say about the ones we might expect to be able to see what is coming? We must be able to realize that our authorities on earth are not ultimate. Sometimes, can't power and authority, or maybe simply clinging to tradition, perhaps shift our attention away from what really matters? How often do we ourselves overlook what happens at Christmas time due to being wrapped up in our gift giving or our own expectations of what's going to happen? Do we look for fulfillment in a store, online? Or maybe more challenging, do we think we must and only find the Christ child in a warm church on the evening of December 24th? Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with giving presents, of course. And worshiping with brothers and sisters in Christ on Christmas is certainly a good thing. But let's not get so wrapped up in those things that we miss the miracle of God in our lives. Christ comes into human form, to human life in the ordinary as we experience it. And if we aren't paying attention, it can be very easy to miss at times. At Christmas, we celebrate and lift up the miracle of God coming into flesh to live among us. One of the most beautiful things about that message is that God doesn't stop dwelling among us at the end of this 12-day season. God in Christ remains with you throughout your life, no matter what. And that's not the end of it. God wasn't just willing to be physically born into humanity, but God sticks it out with you, even through death. Christmas is a wonderful occasion, no doubt, but it's not complete until you realize that it ultimately leads through death to Easter, Christ's victory for us over the grave, which shows us that God's love for you is more powerful than death. In today's story, we're reminded, I think, that we shouldn't pretend to contain God in our own expectations. I mean, think about it. Do we expect foreigners from the East, no less, with strange practices, to be the first people to worship Jesus in Matthew's Gospel? Yet the wise men in our story do exactly that. They show up unexpectedly. And once they show up, what do? They worship, they give gifts, they celebrate with great joy, and then they listen to God in their dream. God chooses those we might not expect, such as these wise men from the East. God chooses them to participate in God's wonderful story of love for us. So remember that when you presume that you are not the right person to participate in this ministry of sharing God's love through this story. And accordingly, worship, bring gifts, and listen. Because, like it or not, God's already chosen to include not only foreigners, but you in this tale of almighty love for you.
Our hymn